"Sir, may I wake your dead daughter?" whispered the homeless woman. The sky above Green Hill Cemetery was leaden gray, as if it too was ready to break down in tears. A fine, almost invisible rain fell silently, leaving cold pearls on the moss-covered gravestones. Everything stood still, as though time itself had slowed, veiled in mourning and quiet contemplation. Not a gust of wind, not a sound. Only the distant hoarse caw of a crow tore through the silence, amplifying the sense of loss. At the edge of a freshly dug grave stood Richard Holloway. His motionless figure looked carved from stone. His gaze, empty, lost, was fixed on the ground. His clenched hand awkwardly gripped a bouquet of white lilies, a desperate attempt to bring a sliver of purity into this crushing darkness. He wore a black suit, impeccably tailored, the armor of a man used to control, but even that armor had cracked. Reality was too strong. At his feet lay a small white coffin, delicately carved. It was the coffin of Emily, his only daughter. 6 years of life. 6 years of smiles, dreams, and bedtime stories. 6 years erased by a single merciless word: leukemia. The disease took her in less than a year, and all his millions were powerless to stop it. The guests murmured quietly, glancing at him with sympathy, but from a safe distance. They all understood. No words could fill such a void. No fortune could buy back a lost child, and no one dared breach the invisible wall of grief surrounding Richard. He was silent. He didn't cry, didn't sigh. His heart was so utterly broken that even tears refused to come. And then, amid the sacred fragile silence, a voice rang out, soft, hesitant, like a breath carried by the wind. "Sir, may I wake your dead daughter?" All heads turned toward the sound. The words hung in the air, like a spell. A few steps away, on the damp ground, stood a young woman. She wore rags, oversized, stained clothes hanging from her thin frame like cloth on a hanger. Her hair, tangled, matted, fell around a face marked by dirt, exhaustion, and an uncanny clarity. Her bare feet sank into the wet soil as if she didn't feel it. But her eyes, they glowed, softly but fiercely. The kind of light only found in those who have walked through hell and refused to stay there. Her name was Hope. Outrage surged through the mourners. Whispers turned into grumbles, then exploded into shouts. "Get her out of here!" barked a woman in an elegant suit, her face flushed with anger. "She's insane! An imposter!" muttered a man, adjusting his tie with trembling fingers. "How dare she! This is an insult to Emily and her father!" came voices from every direction. The crowd stirred. A few people signaled the security guards. It seemed only a moment before they would drag the girl away, her voice drowned by the rising wave of collective rage. But suddenly, a hand rose, Richard Holloway's hand. He placed it firmly on the shoulder of a relative, about to give the command. Silence fell instantly. For the first time since his daughter's death, Richard broke his silence. His eyes, once glazed and empty, now burned with something else. Pain, yes, but also a flicker of hope. His voice came out rough, as if unused for days. "Repeat it. Repeat what you just said." The silence thickened again. No one dared speak. All eyes were fixed on the girl. A fragile silhouette against a gray sky. One soul against the world. Hope met his gaze, and she didn't flinch. Her voice, soft yet unwavering, held no madness, only a devastating sincerity. "I can bring your daughter back, but you must believe." "I know it sounds insane, sir," the girl whispered. She took a deep breath, as if gathering every ounce of courage left in her. "But sometimes we need to hear what lies beyond reason. The things that can't be explained. the things that pain and fear force us to reject. She fell silent for a moment, her eyes scanning the mourners, as if trying to reach each soul standing at the funeral. "I'm not a doctor, not a priestess. I don't have the gift of miracles. I'm just someone who hears those no one else listens to, those who are gone, but whose voices are still alive. I'm not promising the impossible. I can only try, for her, and for you." An invisible breath swept through the crowd. The outrage that had flared moments ago now faded, giving way to something else. Wonder, unease, and a strange, unspoken respect. And in the air, suspended above them, hung something fragile but unmistakable. Hope. Richard said nothing. He didn't send her away. He simply watched her, still cloaked in mourning, but no longer entirely broken. In that strange, suspended silence, this girl might just be his last chance to hear his daughter's voice. The days after the funeral were a storm. Global media pounced on the story, a billionaire, silent over his daughter's white coffin, and a homeless girl in rags, claiming she could wake the dead child. Madness or miracle? Hope? Fraud or medium? Has the tycoon lost his mind from grief? Headlines flooded every screen, every feed. Social media exploded, mockery, accusations of manipulation, and, in a few quiet corners, whispered hope. But the truth was buried beneath a mountain of speculation and sensationalism. Far from the cameras, in the stillness of his luxury estate, Richard Holloway couldn't forget her eyes, that voice which had dared to break the silence of death, that certainty, not madness, but something deeper. He had to know the truth. So, in secret, he launched an investigation of his own. What he discovered about Hope changed everything. She wasn't a con artist. She wasn't chasing fame. She was born in a rundown neighborhood. Her mother, a nurse, had died of an overdose when Hope was only 10. The streets became her home. She survived by singing in subway stations, reading names on gravestones, praying for those the world had forgotten. She spoke to the dead not for attention, but because, with them, she felt less alone than with the living. Rumors said she spent nights in an abandoned hospice on the outskirts of the city. Locals whispered about children's ghosts still lingering there. Some swore they had seen her talking to someone invisible. It was as though she had a connection, not logical, not scientific, but deeply real. Richard was shaken. And then, he did something he'd never done before. He went to find her himself. He found her in the park. She was sitting alone on a weathered bench, wearing simple, worn clothes. No security, no stage, just a person. Quiet. Alone. Real. He sat down beside her. Long silence. Thousands of questions. 1,000 cries locked inside him. At last, he asked, "What do you want, Hope? Money? A house? A job?" She looked up slowly. Her eyes were calm, clear. She shook her head. "Just let me try." "Try? You mean speak to her?" "Yes, sir. To Emily. So she knows she's not forgotten. That her voice, even if no one else can hear it, still matters." This simple exchange of words marked the beginning of an unexpected journey, where pain and hope intertwined in a fragile balance. A week had passed. In the vast, silent mansion of Richard Holloway, a door creaked softly, one that hadn't opened in months. It was Emily's bedroom, a room frozen in time, like a sanctuary where memory refused to fade. The pale blue walls still bore traces of childish drawings, smiling suns, rainbow-colored trees, falling stars. Stuffed animals sat neatly arranged on the bed, as if a little girl might come running in at any moment, laughing again. Clothes were carefully folded on the dresser, still waiting for a return that would never come. Hope stepped in alone. Her footsteps were almost inaudible on the thick carpet. There was something sacred in her movement, a deep, reverent quiet, as though the pain that once filled this place had made it holy. She sat at the edge of the bed, placed her hands on her knees, and closed her eyes. A heavy silence fell, almost tangible. Then she began to speak, not to Richard, who stood outside the door, but to Emily, to the child who was no longer there, and yet whose presence still filled the room like air. She spoke for hours, about cold nights where cardboard boxes and subway benches were the only refuge, about the fear that tightens around your throat when you're alone, about hunger, about the indifferent stares of strangers, about a mother who would never return. But she also spoke of something else, of hope, of the hand of a loved one you still feel, even when they're gone, of a light that finds its way through the thickest dark, of the strength we discover deep within, just when we believe there's nothing left. Behind the door, Richard listened. Each word broke through him, cracking the ice that had wrapped around his soul. This wasn't a miracle. It wasn't resurrection. But it was something more. As if, through Hope's voice, Emily had finally been able to say goodbye. In the days that followed, Richard offered Hope a place in his home, not as an act of charity, but as an expression of deep, wordless gratitude. She declined elite schools and a life of comfort. She had a dream, to help others like her, those who were lost, broken, forgotten. Richard listened, and for the first time in a long time, he truly heard. He bought an old abandoned orphanage on the outskirts of the city, fully renovated it, warm bedrooms, playrooms, classrooms, green gardens. Hope gave the place a name, the Voice of Silence. It became home to children without documents, without families, without hope. Children whose lives seemed written in invisible ink, until someone came along to read them aloud. Every night, Hope walked the halls like a living nightlight. She would whisper to the little ones, "You are alive. You have the right to be heard. I see you. I'm here." And in those simple words lived a quiet power, the kind that could stir even the most weary soul. A year passed. On Emily's birthday, the city's Central Park was transformed. The once quiet space filled with voices and children's laughter. Families gathered, volunteers, passers-by, and of course, Richard Holloway. Dressed in his usual black suit, now standing among children, his eyes no longer cold. They shimmered with tears he no longer tried to hide. In the center of the crowd stood Hope. On a small makeshift stage, holding a worn notebook filled with her own writing, she took a deep breath and began to read. "For you, Emily, and for all those whom life took too soon." The poem, her own, was a tribute to love, to loss, and most of all, to memory. It spoke of absence as an invisible thread, of light that never fades, even in the darkest night. At the end, she raised her eyes to Richard. And, just like 1 year before, she said, "Sir, may I wake your dead daughter?" A reverent silence fell. Then Hope added, "Perhaps it's not death that needs waking, but the life we've forgotten how to live." And at that moment, every person in the crowd lifted a paper lantern into the air, each with a name, a word, a memory written on it. At Hope's signal, the lanterns rose, gently, shimmering, like sparks of hope climbing toward the stars. Richard watched, motionless. Tears rolled silently down his cheeks. He understood. Because of Hope, because of the children, he had awakened not just memories, but love, life, light. And in that sky, aglow with 100 silent flames, he finally found peace. If you enjoyed this story, please support me with a thumbs up. It's just one click for you. But for me, it's a huge joy and motivation to keep writing. Thank you.